All right, good to go.
Yep, we are good to go. You want any kind of introduction? Or are you just going to introduce yourself?
I'll just go for it.
All right,
All
take it
right,
away.
well, thank you everyone for coming today. I really appreciate taking the time to sit down for 45 minutes or so and listening to my talk. My name is Allison Azmy. I am the horticulturist here at LREC. And today I'm going to be talking to you about seed collection and seed cleaning. So kind of more of the techniques you can use if you're interested in doing collection or cleaning in your own home for your own benefit or in your backyard. If at any time you have any questions, feel free to just unmute yourself, ask them as we go, or put them into the chat. James is going to monitor that and let me know if anything goes in there. So we'll just start off right away, how to get started with seed collecting and seed cleaning. So there's a few good questions and things to think about when you decide you want to do some seed collecting or seed cleaning. Most importantly, why are you collecting seed? So what is your purpose? Are you going to be using the seed for propagation purposes? So growing out your own plants from seed? Are you trying to do a restoration project on your property? Or just overall collecting seed and cleaning it for spreading out in your yard? Having the answer to this question can kind of help you guide you to the next question, which is how much seed do you need? So for propagation purposes, that's going to be a lot less than if you were doing a restoration project. So keeping in mind that a single seed head, so this is the seed head of Monarda fistulosa, so the wild bergamot. And in this seed head, there can be tens, if not hundreds of seeds, depending on the species. And of course, if you were doing propagation, that means that there's a lot of possibility for plants. So you don't need a whole lot of seed if you're doing it just for your own propagation purposes. But of course, it's always good to collect more than you need because not all these seeds will be viable and germinate. If you're doing it for restoration purposes, of less controlled situation to just throw the seed out. So collecting more seed than you even think you might need is always good, just so you have plenty. Another thing to keep in mind is to try and collect as local as you can. So we always try to get local genotype seed. So that's going to be seed from plants that have grown up and evolved in our local area. So preferably within your city or county, even across the state, the genotype can change, and that'll affect everything from, how it grows here, how it looks. The same species can look very different across different localities. And of course, do you have permission to collect where you know the plants are and where you want to collect from? So if you're collecting from your own yard, this isn't really a factor, but if you want to collect from a neighbor's yard or from a property that might be owned by the state or be a part of MDC or something like that, make sure you locate who owns that property and get their permission to collect from it. And then one final note before we move on is when you're collecting seed, it's always good to aim to not collect all the seed, especially if you're doing it out on a property that's not your own. You want to, in general, we kind of go for 50% of the seed. So what that would look like is if you had a plant that had, say 5 or 6 seed heads on it, collecting 2 or 3 of those. And therefore you're leaving seed to continually naturally spread in where the plants already are. All right, so you kind of got the basics, how you get started. So first we're going to talk about the actual seed collecting itself. You'll need some very basic tools to get started with seed collecting. So paper bags is pretty much a must for seed collecting. I always suggest doing paper bags over plastic. If you do collect into plastic bags and you're not taking out the seed in time, often the seed will be moist at least a little bit, and you want to make sure you don't encourage any mildew or mold to grow in. Also, if you leave seed in plastic bags, it'll just start germinating right in the seed heads sometimes. So paper is kind of the way to go when you're doing any sort of seed collecting or cleaning until the very end, when you have cleaned, dried the seed, and it is ready to be stored. If you're going to be collecting multiple different types of species, Sometimes a harvesting bag, so that's this bag on the right here, could be useful. Several paper bags could go in the harvesting bag, and it just kind of frees up your hands to collect. Obviously, this is a little bit more specialized tool, so unless you're planning on doing a lot of collection over multiple years, it might not be something you're interested in, but it is something to consider if that's what you're going for. Of course, a good pair of gloves. Sometimes some of the seeds that you might collect will be a little bit abrasive or pointy, and gloves can help that a lot. There's a lot of species that are pretty rough to collect. And pruners if the species doesn't really strip easily off its stalk. So just clipping anything, any of the seed heads off that you're trying to collect. So now you got your tools for collection, you know why you're collecting, you know how much you're collecting. So what species are you going to collect? Today, I'm just going to break it down into these 3 different categories. So spring ephemerals, perennials, and annuals. I'm not going to touch too much on trees and shrubs. Often people aren't going to collect seed from trees or shrubs to grow out. It's a much longer process, and it can be a little bit more specific depending on what you're trying to collect. So first of all, spring ephemerals. So spring ephemerals, of course, are these plants that pop up very early in the spring. So you have bluebells, bloodroot, Dutchman's breeches, all the very early blooming plants in the spring. Some good tips for collecting spring ephemerals are to flag the plants when you see them. Often because they are so early, they're a little bit shorter than plants that will replace them later on in the spring throughout the summer. So by the time the seeds ripe, the plant will often have disappeared. So flagging where that plant was will make it easy to come back and check on the seed to see when it's ready. Which brings us to continue watching the seed. Most seeds, at least a lot of seeds on spring ephemerals will kind of ripen over time. So just coming back to those flagged spots, checking, seeing how ripe things are. A good way, rule of thumb to tell if a seed is ripe is most seeds that are green in color are not going to be ripe yet. If they start to turn darker hue or brown, that's usually a good sign that they're ripening. I'll touch on some different resources later on in the presentation that kind of can give you an idea of where to look for what the seed looks like and help you guide how they look when you're collecting them. Another thing for spring ephemerals is that the seed itself doesn't have a very long shelf life. We often suggest that you go ahead, just throw out the seed immediately once you collect it, wherever you want to see that plant growing. So usually taking the time to process it fully and store it is going to not last a whole very long in the end. And then keep in mind that while we often think of woodland species, those spring ephemerals being in woodlands, there's also several types of prairie spring ephemeral species. So on the left here is the wild hyacinth, and on the right there is that shooting star. And these are especially important to flag because prairies will quickly grow up around these once they are finished blooming, and you'll lose them pretty fast in the prairie. So definitely making sure you flag any ephemeral species that you want to collect. So next we'll talk about perennials. Perennial species can be a little bit hard to categorize. Obviously, there's so many of them. They all look different and you treat them somewhat different. But I'm going to try and kind of categorize some of the types of seeds that you might find or for species that you're looking for. First of all, there's seeds that kind of ripen in sequence. So this rose turtlehead here on the left and the cardinal flower on the right are good examples. Tall bellflower is another good example, and obedient plant. So they will flower from the base of this spike up to the top. And as you can see on this rose turtlehead, you can kind of see the seed pods at the bottom starting to brown and ripen. And of course, the flowers are still at the top. So a good way to know when these are ready to collect is to wait till the flowers are pretty much finished. Be checking those base seed pods right there, seeing if the seed's looking ready. And then when the majority of it has ripened, is usually a good time to collect it. Another species that ripens in sequence, but ripens a little differently, is gamma grass. So that's this stalk of seed heads over here. The seeds are all stacked on top of each other, and they ripen from the top down. And the seeds are very large, as you can see. And it's always good to just collect those as you see them ripe, because these will fall off really quickly. You'll lose them just going along every once in a while. Here at Litzinger, whenever we go out walking along the trails, seeing any ripe gamma grass seed, just collect it and store it. Predation is another something that you'll have to think about. So obviously a lot of birds, mammals, insects predate upon seeds for their own food sources, but that does make it a little bit more challenging when you're trying to collect the seed as well. So if this picture on the right, we have a bird eating some rosinweed seeds, so silphium species seeds, and that's the silphiums. A lot of the sunflowers are very attractive to birds, so they will go pretty quickly. So sometimes when you're trying to collect one of these types of species, looking at it, seeing when some of them start to ripen, and then getting out there as quickly as possible, and potentially having to collect some of the seed when it's still a little green. So collecting it when it's green, laying it out and let it kind of finish ripening up off the stalk. It's just kind of a matter of waiting and seeing when things start to ripen. Seeing when the birds come is a good sign that you're going to start having ripe seeds on some of these plants. And here, another type of predation you might encounter is insect predation. So Baptisia over here on the left is a really good example of that. While these pods right here look like they're fully intact, when you break them open, there's little weevils inside, and they will start eating on the seeds. So Baptisia is a good one if you want to collect the pods and then immediately crush them up and lay them outside. That way, any insects and weevils that have gotten in there will escape before all the seeds have gone. Echinacea, the purple coneflower. This one is a very hard one to collect because birds will go right to it, and it looks like a full seed head here on the right. But if you take a closer look, the seeds themselves are actually these kind of lighter colored diamond shaped seeds in the seed head. So when you go out to collect some of these species that are predated upon a lot by birds or mammals, looking in and seeing if you actually can see the seed in the seed head. That's another great reason to look up different resources to try and identify what the actual seed looks like, not just the seed head. Next, we have seeds that split open like at the top of the seed capsule or pod. So here on the left is some foxglove beard tongue. So that one kind of splits open towards the top. And on the right, this cute little seed box, which is a wonderful one to collect. And that also splits open at the top. Bunchflower is another one that splits open facing up, and columbine, another good example of that. These, you just want to make sure when you start to see them splitting open, that's usually a good sign that the seed is becoming ready. But also keep in mind when collecting that, make sure you snip off or take off any of the seed heads or pods that you want to collect from, and keeping them upright until you get them into a bag. Turning them over too much will allow the seed to fall out, and you'll just lose a lot of seed that way. So other types of seeds that split open, but split open kind of along one seam on the seed pod are like Illinois bundleflower or other bean species. On the right here is a picture of the shining blue star, the amsonia, that also splits open. It's usually a good sign that the seed is ready, but the farther it splits open, the more likely the seed will fall out. So kind of keeping an eye on these species, seeing when they just start to split open. You can see in this picture of the amsonia, this pod out up at the top here has kind of started to split. So it's a good sign that you might want to go out, take a look at that, open it a little, see if the seeds inside have started to brown out. And if they have, go ahead and collect that. Seeds that just strip off, these are always the easiest to collect. There's usually, they just come right off the stalk. That's going to be rye and other grasses. Carrot species will just often strip right off the stalk. That's a good way to tell if they're ready, is if they don't give you any trouble when you try and take them off, chances are the seed is ripe. When you go to take off many of, especially ryegrass seed, it should just come right off in your hand and shouldn't have any problem coming off the stalk. Fluffy seeds are one that a lot of native plants have. And on the left here is this picture of the ironweed. On the right is some Joe Pye weed. And a good way to tell ripeness with these is to look and see exactly how fluffed out they are. So as you can see in this picture of the ironweed, these top seeds here are still pretty clasped together and closed up. When you go to try and collect these, if you were hand collecting them, they would not pull off the stalk very easily. On the other hand, the seeds down at the bottom here would easily come off. They're very fluffed out. Good way to tell that they are pretty much ripe and ready to go. On the right, this Joe Pye weed. This looks a little raggedy. It's been out there a while. A lot of the seeds have fallen off, but that's another good sign that chances are a lot of the seeds fallen off. It's good time to collect it. Other fluffy seeds might include, asters or goldenrods. They all have fluffy seed, and just keeping an eye out for them to completely fluff out. And then finally, we'll talk about these seeds. These are specific seeds that pop, so they can be a little bit tricky to collect. Hairy petunia pops, phlox, or the spigelia, the pink root, are all popping, and along with the jewelweed, which is a very well-known popping seed. You can see in this right picture, the left pod here fully intact. And then when it's touched, if it's ripe, it will explode and kind of curl up on itself. Collecting these, like I said, could be a little tricky. If they're too ripe, they're going to just pop on you as you try and grab them. So keeping an eye out, testing out some of the seed pods for when they're ready, and then going and collecting the ones that haven't quite ripened enough to pop. And then, of course, keeping those in an enclosed space. So whether that be in a folded over paper bag or in a shoebox, as they finish ripening, they'll just start to pop on their own, and making sure that those aren't flying everywhere. And then jewelweed, which is an annual, going along with other annuals here. Things like Plains coreopsis or Snow on the Mountain are great annuals. And these, kind of like the spring ephemerals, the seeds don't have a long shelf life. So most likely you won't collect these for propagation, since they are annuals. Their life is only 1 year long. So collecting these and then throwing them out along with other native seeds in the wintertime. So before a snow is always a great time to throw out native seeds, and just letting them stratify and germinate outside. So chances are, if you're going to collect annuals, it's going to be more for just spreading around any annual seed that you already have on your property, or introducing it to new places. All right, so you've collected your seed, you've taken it back to your house. What do you do now? So pretty easy. You want to lay it out in a box. Once again, avoid plastic. I would stick to paper and cardboard at this step still. Here we use these cardboard trays, and they can be found, if you're going to be doing a lot of seed collecting, might be something to invest in. They can be found on Amazon, just purchase them online. Shoebox works great. You can do it in a regular shipping box, but the seam on the bottom, sometimes seeds will get lost under there. So if you do use that, I would suggest making sure you really tape up the flaps of the box so you don't lose any seed out of it. And we lay it out to make sure that it dries out, but also in case anything that we accidentally collected, when we were doing the initial seed collecting, can escape. So little spiders or insects that might have been on the seed when you collect it, just lay it out, let everything dry out, and get ready for cleaning it. And we also, here we label everything. So depending on your purpose, you might not label as much as we do, but it's always good to kind of know what you collected and where you've collected from, and the date, especially if you're going to be storing any seed. So this is the type of just basic label that we use here at Litzinger. So putting the scientific name is what we use, but you can also use the common name. And then we put the date that it was collected, the location. If you're collecting from your house, this isn't going to be as big of a deal. And then because we have several people always collecting seeds, knowing who collected it, just in case we need to go back and have any questions answered on the specific seed. So we'll create a label like this, and just like I showed in this last one, we just put it right into the box and let everything dry out. So before I go on to seed cleaning, does anybody have any questions about seed collecting?
I have a question.
Yeah.
It seems like there might be some seeds that can be picked before they're completely ready, and they'll still, mature whatever off the stem, right?
Yeah.
Or the
So
majority of them, you have to wait. So they're.
I'd say a good way to view it is, if you can wait till it seems fully ripe, it's going to just help with the vitality of the seed. But there are quite a few species. It's hard to categorize which ones, but you can collect some species earlier and just let them ripen in a box as they lay out. If you're not able to collect when it's fully ripe and you know that it's going to be ripening at a time you can't collect, you can always try collecting it early, letting it lay out, and then going about cleaning them and just seeing what kind of germination you get from that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? All right, well, I will move on then. So we've got all the seed collected, it's dried out, it's ready to be cleaned. So what do we need? Well, on a large scale and professional level, they have quite a few different big machines and tools that are used. So on the left hand picture, this is a hammer mill, so it's gonna crush up and separate seeds. In the middle here is a seed dryer. So this is a seed dryer that the restoration folks over at Shaw recently got. So this will dry out big quantities of seed that are put in these large barrels. And then on the right here is what's called a seed winnower. So it uses airflow to separate the seeds. And this is something that they don't make seed winnowers so much for commercial uses. Sometimes they do, but there's a lot of plans for building your own seed winnower if you think you might be cleaning a lot of seed. And winnowers are good for seed that has a lot of the stems and leaves, and the seed itself and the seed head have different weights. So they will be affected more by the air that is passing through to help separate it. But here and at your home, you probably aren't going to have any of these specialized tools. So there are ways to kind of replicate what they do yourself. So cleaning seed really varies a lot depending on what species you have. So it's hard to, once again, like talking about collecting seed, to really directly categorize which seed needs to be cleaned which way. But there's a lot of different techniques that you can use and try out to find the best way to clean it. Like I said, you should only need household items for this. So a lot of the different big, large scale cleaning systems can be easily replicated with home items. And then once again, familiarizing yourself with what the seed actually looks like. So some seed, you think you've collected the actual seed, and it's actually just a capsule that is holding the seed. A lot of the smaller seeds, or the dust seeds, have tiny little capsules that they're held in, and they kind of look like they could be the seed themselves, but they're actually just the capsule holding the seed. And then, of course, experiment with different methods. What works for me or other people, you might find a different tool or method to try it out with. And then before we get into all the different seed cleaning methods, some vocabulary for you. So chaff is a term that we use often, and that is just the leftover material from the seed. So that would include any stems, pods, leaves, and then other seed that you're not fully able to clean out from the seed heads. And when you have your chaff, so here we just clean and put them into paper bags or large bins to, we will throw them out on property, which you can do if you have an area where you just kind of want to fill in with native seeds, just throw out the chaff. You can also dispose of it if it's not something that you think you might need. So what are some tools that are good for cleaning? Sieves and screens are probably one of the most used tools that we have for cleaning. So you can use just a regular kitchen sieves, which are these two, or the colander will work well depending on the size. And they're great for just filtering out the seed away from the chaff. Here we have this bucket system that we can sometimes use. So if you can see in this right picture, at the top here, this is the widest gauge of screen. And as you go around, they get smaller and smaller. So the way you would use a system like this is to break up or put your seeds into the top, which is going to be the highest gauge of screen, and then shaking it down and then looking through and seeing which level the seed settles at. And then anything above or below that would be the chaff. Screens and sieves can also be used not just for filtering, but for breaking apart seed. So some really good, so this screen right here is just a basic wooden frame with hardware cloth stapled to it. Species like silphium, so the rosin weeds, sunflowers, asters, other fluffy seeds, Rudbeckia seed, they all kind of clasp tightly to their seed head. So using a screen to rub against those seed heads will help break them up. I would suggest if you do use a screen like this or something similar, putting it over a bucket or a tub to just collect anything that that will fall beneath it. You can also flip this over so that the hardware cloth is like on the ground, and use that as kind of a method of putting the seed head down, and you can use your feet, kind of stomp and rub it against the screen on the ground. That'll help to just break things up. Once that's broken up, you can then filter it through either a sieve or a screen system like I showed you before to get out the chaff. Files and graters and sandpaper can be useful. So these are more used for things with hard coatings on it, or things in the bean species in the bean family, or seeds with fleshy coating. So you'll often find these types of tools used for tree and shrub seeds. But you could potentially use, household grater in place of a, larger gauge hardware cloth screen. Just make sure you don't rub anything against it too aggressively, since it will cut it up and break it down. But it could be a good substitute if you just have a few things to clean. Using a meat mallet or a hammer can be really effective for some species. A hammer, I don't readily suggest as the first thing to go to. It can be a little aggressive and crush the seed instead of just separating it from the seed head. But if you don't have a meat mallet, it could be a good thing to use. Echinacea purpurea, the purple coneflower, a meat mallet really works really great for that. The seeds heads are very pointy and spiky, and once you start using the meat mallet with its little tines, it can help break it up, and then you can send it through a sieve to separate any seed out. The rattlesnake master, while it doesn't quite cling to the seed head as much, I would say, as purple coneflower, it's also kind of a more abrasive and pointy seed head and can be easily broken down with a meat mallet. Rolling pins are really good tools for especially these really small seed capsules. So this is kind of what I mentioned earlier. Culver's root has these, what look like could be little seeds on their on the stalks, but they're actually the capsules that hold the little seeds in them. So taking them off the stalk and then using a rolling pin to just roll over everything, crush everything up, and then sending it through a sieve to separate out these capsules from the actual seed is very effective. Seed box is another great one to use with rolling pin, as well as the foxglove beard tongue. That one's a pretty hard seed capsule, and rolling pin is really good at just breaking that down. Plastic bags are a good tool. So for some of the mint species, so Monarda, the mountain mint, horse mint, those all have small seeds that are easily shaken out of the seed heads. So with this method, if you just grab here, this is a gallon size plastic bag. You can use a bigger bag if you have more seeds that you need to clean. For small quantities, the gallon size works pretty well. Just placing your seed heads in the bag. I like to blow a little bit of air into the bag and just clasp it really tight at the top so it stays kind of inflated, and then just shaking it. And after, in this picture, I've probably shaken it for 10 or 15 seconds. You can see at the corner here, a lot of the little seeds have already started to fall out into the corner. And then these are very easy to just send through a screen or a sieve, and the seed heads will be separated from the seed. I always suggest shaking the same seed heads multiple times, because you'll be surprised at how much seed will come out every time that you shake them. And then one type of seed that's kind of has a very specific method for cleaning is milkweed seeds. So in this picture, this milkweed is very fluffed out. I would suggest not collecting it at this stage. You could potentially still clean the seed like this. It would just be a lot messier. So if it is fluffed out, you can rub it against the screen. It'll kind of separate the seeds from the silks, but you'll just see milkweed fluff floating around for days. So a much better method is to collect the milkweed pods when they're still a little bit green. The seeds inside should be fairly ripe still. You can kind of break it open a little and check, or when they've just start to split open. So don't wait till things start to fluff out. What you want to do is, once you've collected that, just fully split open the seed pod. You'll see all the silks and the seeds are nicely lined up in there. And then just grab the point down here and hold that tightly, and you can kind of peel back the rest of the seed pod. If the pods are still fairly green and pliable, it makes it really easy. So you're just going to peel it back, kind of like corn, and then just start running your finger over the seeds, and they will readily fall off the silks, and very easily. Once you do that, after a couple of seconds, it'll all fall off, and you'll just be left with the pure milkweed seed. So that's a really great technique to use for milkweeds. And then make sure you dispose of the silks weigh them down with something. If you just throw them in the trash, they can always fluff up again and get everywhere. So milkweed seeds can be a little messy, but if you try this technique, should go pretty easily. So once you've cleaned all your seed and everything's very dry and to the point that you want it, which that's something I didn't mention, but cleaning seeds, especially for your use at home, is going to kind of depend on how far you want to clean them. So when you go to a store and you buy seed, you're going to get just the pure seed. It's not going to have any chaff on it, but it's not necessary that you get it as clean as possible. Just kind of trying to help it along so it's not fully encapsulated in any sort of seed head or capsule or pod. Will just help it for germination. It also helps with storage. So just breaking it down, getting just the seed, making the quantity a lot smaller if you are collecting a lot of seed. So once we've cleaned everything here at Litzinger, we just use plastic bags. Once again, the seed's very dry, so plastic's okay now. And then the tag that was in the box before, I'll just slip right into the bag. So that way, when we use up the seed, the bag doesn't have a bunch of permanent marker on it, easy to reuse over the years. And then we also have a system like in this picture on the right, where we alphabetize and sort all the seed. If you are looking to store seed for extended amount of times, having some sort of system might be beneficial. If you don't have as much as we do, even just using hanging file folders labeled can be very helpful if you're trying to store and organize any seed. Before I go on to the resources that I would suggest, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them about the cleaning. Anybody? All right, well, some really great resources. So Lois mentioned it earlier. Prairie Moon Nursery is a wonderful place to go to get information on everything surrounding seed and germination. They have a lot of good information. I wouldn't suggest purchasing seed from Prairie Moon. They're located, I think it's up north. So none of their seed is going to be even close to our local genotype, but using their website, they have a lot of different information. So if you go to a species, they're going to show you what the seed looks like, and they usually have a coin or some sort of comparison so you can see how big it is. They also show you different stages of the plant as it's growing. So especially if you're going to be throwing this out and wanting to make sure you identify the plant as they germinate outside, this can be very helpful. They also use germination codes. So on the right-hand side here is all the information about the plant, and then they have the germination codes. And when you hover over the code, you're going to see what it means. So for this one, C is for cold moist stratification. So the 10 is referring to the days. So this needs 10 days of cold moist stratification. So they are a great place to go. I check them if I'm ever propagating any species that I am not as familiar with. They're one of the first places that I'll go to check for information. Grownative is also another great source for anything related to native plants, but especially for seed information. They have all these different guides on collection, identification, and stratification. They are a wonderful place to go to look for this. They also have information on local places as far as selling plants or seed. And then that pretty much wraps up everything. I'm happy to take any more questions. If you think of anything after the fact, please don't hesitate to email me. I'm trying to answer any questions that you have.
Allison, there's also a good YouTube channel called Grow It, Build It.
Okay.
And they actually will show you the different plants, what they look like, how to, gather the seed, doing the stratification, and they do it all on video so that you can actually look rather than having something that's written.
Yeah. Would you mind throwing that in the chat in case anybody
Sure.
Wants that information? Thank you.
Everybody can unmute and turn your video back on. Any questions?
How long do you store them dry, and what about stratification?
Yeah, thanks. So as far as storage, depends a lot on the seed. It's hard to, can't really say like a good rule of thumb overall. Storing, the cooler and the darker it is, generally helps with storage. So if you are planning on storing seed for an extended amount of time, trying to keep things cool, dry, and dark will help. As far as stratification goes, I didn't really touch on that. That's a stratification, propagation, germination, could be a whole nother presentation. But if you're interested in specific species, definitely check out Prairie Moon. That'll tell you a lot on stratification and which species require that.
Allison, when you say extended amount of time, what do you mean? How long is an extended amount of time?
So I would say like when I've collected for, that's a good question to clarify that. When I've collected like for my own personal use just at home, usually I'm planning on collecting seed and maybe propagating it in the springtime. So within a year or two, for most seeds, is going to be a good, you want to use them within that first year or two. So I would say extended amount of time would be anything beyond that. It's not to say that the seed won't germinate or propagate. It's just to say that the vitality overall from the seeds is going to go down over time.
Yeah, a lot of grasses and sedges, annuals, after the first year, they really start kind of declining. They don't have a really long life in the soil, whereas something like the members of the bean family have like a really hard seed coat, and they can last in the soil for years. If anybody's familiar with the invasive Lespedeza or Serratia Lespedeza is the common name for that one. That thing is a pain in restorationist side because it has a 30-year seed life. So like it can vary really by species and by just types of plants, but a good rule of thumb, like Allison said, is just trying to use it up, the sooner the better, and know that the percentage of live seed really goes down considerably after the first couple of years.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to my first enrichment. Hopefully more in the future. But like I said, if you think of anything after the thought or have any more specific questions on species, please feel free to email me.
Allison, I'm sorry, I do have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any reference that I could look up to see which kind of seeds you can actually take to different foreign countries and stuff? Because I know is it like plants, sometimes they don't let you bring in certain plants and stuff. Are seeds the same thing?
I assume so. I don't know if maybe the USDA might have information on that. James or Adam, do you have any information on that question?
I do know seeds count as like plant material, so it's still a regulation on that. I have never personally ordered things from overseas. I know Adam has. Adam might be able to comment on that.
But there must be something that tells you what seeds or plant matter you can't bring into each. Like if I'm taking it to Argentina, or you're taking seeds to another country to try to grow. Is there or not?
Yeah, you would just have to check the like any noxious weed list. There is something for the US. I don't know about other countries. If it has that on there. Give me a minute, I'll have to try to think of it. Yeah, I don't know if there's any one single source that just has everything listed there.
Yeah, my guess it's because each country is going to have different laws and authorities around that. It would have to be more on looking up the country that you're taking it to and seeing what their specific guidelines are.
Okay.
Can anybody hear me? This is Woodward. Okay.
Yes.
I used to do some importing and exporting in my previous life, and APHIS, it's called, let's see, it's APHIS, and it's an organization that I think helps with regulation on plant materials.
Okay.
Thank you, Mary.
Welcome.
Allison, this is Diane D. with a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Diane.
I might have missed it. I came a little bit late, but back to what is the seed and what is the chaff? Sometimes it's really obvious, and sometimes it isn't. And then I get out my little magnifier glass and I look for something that has a little bulge or something, and then then sometimes I'm still confused, which is the seed and which is there any seed left? What are the levels of identifying what the
I would
seed is?
say, yeah, I would say a great place to start is to go to like Prairie Moon and look up the seed that you've collected and seeing what specifically they have. So like I said, they have this, picture of these are the actual seeds. So Baptisia is pretty easy to identify. It's pretty clear which ones are the seeds, but some of the small dust seeds, it can be hard to tell. And truthfully, when you try and clean it, it's not going to always be the clearest if you've gotten all the chaff out and you're left with just seed, but it's not necessary to have pure seed if you're cleaning it and using it for your own purposes. The only reason you would want pure seeds if you're doing some sort of selling of the seed. But Prairie Moon, I often will refer to it if I'm trying to identify what exactly is the seed, and therefore you can kind of go and start breaking down the seed head, and that the process of doing that should help you identify what the seed is, and it could lead you to a good way to clean the seed as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is there any reason you wouldn't put chaff in a compost pile?
I mean, potentially if you did put it into a compost pile, if your compost wasn't, acting as a compost pile and getting hot enough to actually break things down, chaff could germinate in the compost pile. But you could, if you have a good compost pile that's, well heated and breaking things down efficiently, you could throw it into the compost pile.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're definitely not going to ever get all the seed out of the chaff unless it's a really big seed, that's very easy to separate from all the chaff that's been broken down. But generally, you're going to have a small amount of seed get past you.
Yeah. Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much. Like I said, email me if you think of anything in the meantime, and always happy to try and answer questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison, for doing this for everybody.
Thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Great job.
Thank
Yep.
you.
It was great.